Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Tucson's Catalina foothills, November 1st, 1996. Late afternoon sun, golf carts drifting past a row of sedans. A Lincoln claps shut. A flash lifts glass into the desert air. Within minutes, a public space turns into a crime scene that will take years to decode. The victim is 52-year-old real estate investor Gary Triano, well known around Tucson. The event is not subtle, and it is not survivable. From a first response perspective, this is a high-risk post-blast environment in a crowded venue. Patrol arrives within minutes. The first priority is scene safety, a rapid sweep for secondary devices, people pushed back to a cold zone, and a single controlled entry path established toward the Lincoln. A field commander sets hot, warm, and cold perimeters. ATF is notified. County investigators begin the log. Radios cut through the confusion. One voice locks the clock. Command post established. That timestamp becomes the spine for everything that follows. Evidence collection starts before the smoke fully clears. Technicians do not move the vehicle. They map it. The windshield is missing from the frame, catapulted into the lot by a high-energy blast. A debris ellipse is sketched in chalk and then in photographs, each position numbered. Shards embedded in adjacent asphalt are labeled for later metallurgical work. Fire patterning on the hood and firewall is documented. The initial working hypothesis, based on dispersion and the damage to the engine compartment, suggests an underhood or near firewall device, not a trunk load and not a fuel tank ignition. Importantly, no second device is found during the primary sweep. That negative finding matters. It reduces immediate risk to personnel and narrows the profile away from multi-device terror tactics toward a single target event. Witness management runs in parallel. Golfers, staff, and passers-by are separated to prevent cross-contamination of accounts. Each is asked for a short baseline, where they were standing, what they heard first, bang or car alarm, what direction they saw glass travel, and whether they observed anyone loitering near the Lincoln in the minutes before the detonation. Supervisors prefer short, contemporaneous notes over long recollections later. Consistency is king. If two people saw a man in a cap near the front grille at slightly different times, those timestamps will later be tested against any camera view available from the club or nearby businesses. The victim is treated as evidence. Paramedics and detectives coordinate body positioning photographs before removal. The medical examiner is notified, and a transport is scheduled with chain of custody paperwork starting at the curb. Clothing and personal effects remain in place. Even when the cause of death appears obvious, the protocol is the same: document, tag, preserve. The body will become its own scene in the next stage. No retelling of discovery there, just clinical path. Traffic units close lanes along Sunrise Drive to keep civilian vehicles from driving through the fragment field or blowing away light trace. A wind log is started. In a desert city, gusts can move micro-evidence in minutes. A quick canvass of the lot records license plates of vehicles parked within the debris ellipse. That isn't about accusing owners, it's about future contact. If a fragment lodged in a nearby tire, that tire might carry residue valuable to lab chemists. By early evening, the case already has shape. The explosion appears timed to vehicle access rather than to a schedule inside the club. There are no reports of a mechanical fire, no indicators of a running engine that flared into disaster. The sound and pressure waves suggest a compact but purpose-built device capable of defeating a windshield and spreading metallic fragments outward and upward. Investigators mark what is not present. No gunshots, no arson pattern, no evidence of a crash causing the fire. That absence matters as much as what lies on the asphalt. In the command post, the incident commander sketches a first-day plan. Tasking goes out for the morgue team, bomb tech evidence recovery, and a digital lead group to pull any available surveillance from the club's entrances and nearby corridors. This is 1996. No smartphone videos, no instant cloud backups, so canvassing must be fast before stores close and tapes are recorded over. A liaison calls the insurance angle a standard question, not a conclusion. Another officer flags the need to secure the victim's recent schedule and calls log, who expected to meet Triano, and when. For viewers who study cases like this, a single principle keeps the story clear: do not let drama overwrite the log. What happens within minutes, the perimeter decisions, The negative finding of no second device, the numbering of fragments, will later align with lab results, phone records, and testimony. If those later pieces don't line up, that inconsistency is not noise, it's a lead. Before the lights on the fairway click off, the scene is wrapped in tape, the entry path is closed, and the data is preserved enough to travel. In one afternoon, a parking lot became a record. In the next days, that record will split into two synchronized streams, the body and the machine that killed its driver. Our job is to keep those streams clean and converging. Evidence first, theories later. The parking lot is sealed. The work now moves indoors. At the morgue, the victim is received as evidence with the same discipline applied at the scene. Property seals are checked, photographed, and logged against the transport sheet. The name on the chain of custody matches the scene log. Gary Triano, male, 52. Identification is confirmed through fingerprints compared with known records. That confirmation is routine but crucial. Every subsequent finding traces back to a verified identity, not an assumption. Intake begins with external documentation. Full-body photographs precede any disturbance of clothing. The garments are cut along seams, not pulled, to preserve trace. Each layer is packaged separately in paper, labeled, and referenced to an item number that will follow it from locker to courtroom. Hands are bagged in new paper sacks until swabbing is complete. Fingernail scrapings are collected and sealed. A final head-to-toe survey records lacerations, blast tattooing, and shrapnel entry points. There is no speculation here about who built the device or why. This phase measures force, direction, and distance. Radiography is next. Multiple views are taken before any incision: skull, chest, abdomen, and limbs. Metallic densities show up promptly, small, bright fragments distributed in patterns that matter to bomb technicians. Where fragments cluster, they suggest line of sight from the device's origin. In this case, densities align with an underhood or near firewall detonation rather than a trunk charge. The radiology grid notes depth and angle, so the pathologist can retrieve items without losing orientation. Each retrieved fragment is assigned an evidence number and placed into sterile containers for metallurgy, thread class analysis, and residue chemistry. The external exam notes thermal effects limited to the clothing margins nearest the forward torso, consistent with a brief high-temperature flash. There are no soot lines suggesting prolonged flame exposure. This supports an explosive event rather than a post-impact fire. The distribution of superficial abrasions on the face and forearms tracks with windshield glass propelled outward and then back in a secondary wave, an observation that will later be compared with the debris mapping from the lot. The absence of deep charring on the lower legs is recorded as negative evidence. It may help exclude a fuel tank scenario or a device placed under the seat. Again, this is not narrative. It is a set of measurable conditions. Internal examination documents primary blast injuries, rupture consistent with overpressure, and secondary injuries from high-velocity fragments. Organs are weighed and inspected. Representative sections are retained for histology. Blood and vitreous samples are drawn for toxicology. Findings here do not decide motive. They establish cause and mechanism. A preliminary cause of death is entered as complications of an explosive blast. Preliminary is the operative word until lab results return and the radiology, autopsy, and scene reconstruction align. Trace processing is meticulous. Swabs are taken from exposed skin for explosive residue analysis. Hair and fiber collections are performed with clean forceps and taped lifts. Where shrapnel is recovered, the edges are inspected for striation patterns that could later match a specific end cap or tool. Any fragment with threads is handled with gloved care to avoid smearing tool marks. Packaging is standardized. Rigid containers to prevent micro-damage, tamper-evident seals, and clear labels that repeat the case number, the item number, the collector's initials, and the date. Throughout the session, a scribe records timestamps, when each photo is taken, when each fragment is removed, when each sample is sealed. This is not bureaucracy for its own sake. Months or years later, a defense expert will scrutinize these times for gaps. The response to that scrutiny has to be simple. There are none. If an interval exists, waiting for a second radiograph to print, for example, it is annotated. Transparency protects the integrity of the case. The morgue team coordinates with the bomb squad before releasing any fragment for laboratory analysis. A handoff form lists the item numbers, the condition of seals, and the destination lab. This communication loop, medical examiner to bomb techs to crime lab, keeps interpretations consistent. It prevents a common failure in complex crime scenes, one unit reaching conclusions without the other's data. A short human note fits here, and only here. The professionals in this room keep their language dry because it has to be. Families deserve answers that stand up later, not dramatic phrasing that falters under cross-examination. When viewers ask how dignity is maintained amid so much procedure, the answer is in the precision. Accuracy is a form of respect. By late evening, the essential tasks are complete. Identification is confirmed. The preliminary cause and mechanism are documented. Fragments are secured for metallurgy and residue analysis. Clothing, hair, and fiber samples are sealed and logged. Toxicology is underway. Nothing in this chapter retells the parking lot blast. Every line advances a new forensic layer that the courtroom will need. With the autopsy underway, the car and the asphalt become the next lab. Technicians return to the La Paloma parking lot with a single purpose: rebuild the event without moving faster than the evidence will allow. The Lincoln stays where it is until every fragment is plotted. The entry path from the first sweep remains the only way in. Boot covers change at the tape line. Each step is photographed. No one retells the explosion here. The objective is reconstruction. The hood area draws priority. A portable gantry lifts the sheeted hood just enough for safe access. End cap metal is located in the engine compartment and beneath the firewall ledge. Each piece goes into a rigid container with a fresh seal number. Status is marked confirmed for threaded end cap present because the physical profile is not ambiguous. Short lengths of insulated wire recovered near the battery tray are tagged working gauge, and insulation type will be resolved at the lab. Residue swabs from the firewall, underside of the hood, and cowl intake vents are collected in a pattern that mirrors the debris ellipse documented earlier. Chemical class stays working until the chromatograph speaks. Glass mapping ties back to what the morgue radiographs already suggested. Sheets of tempered windshield glass lie outward from the front of the car. Small speckling inside the cabin is present but limited. That outward bias supports an underhood or near firewall origin and is logged as working correlation with autopsy fragment vectors. A negative finding is noted with equal weight. No blast deformation around the fuel tank and no heat pattern consistent with a secondary fire. That helps exclude a trunk charge or fuel-fed scenario. Access points are documented in detail. The driver's door latch shows no pry marks. The ignition cylinder remains intact. The steering column plastic is unbroken. Those are confirmed observations. The hood latch release inside the cabin is photographed. The cable sheath at the front latch is examined for tool impressions. If any micro-marking appears, it will be cast and compared later. For now, possible tool transfer is preliminary only. The battery leads are checked for non-factory splices. A short length of tape residue is lifted from the inner fender and stored. Adhesive analysis is working until matched to any recovered component. Perimeter work focuses on capturing pieces the first pass could have missed. Magnet sweeps and fine screens pull additional metallic flecks from seams in the pavement. Each fine's GPS coordinate isn't available in 1996 terms, so techs grid the lot using chalked squares tied to fixed points. A light pole, a curb seam, the clubhouse stair. That grid keeps analog measurements reproducible. Where fragments cluster, the cluster centroid is marked. Bomb techs will compare that centroid to shrapnel angles recorded in the morgue to triangulate origin. Analog cameras at the club are canvassed. Staff indicate a few external views that roll on loop tapes. Detectives sign out those cassettes and log the exact time they left the building. The existence of footage is working only. Until time codes align, nothing is assumed. Nearby businesses are approached before closing. If a spur road camera caught a sedan arriving in the half hour before the blast, that becomes the first digital breadcrumb. Still, error-correct limits apply. These are time-stamped cassettes, not networked systems. Inside the Lincoln, trace is taken without rummaging. Floorboard debris is vacuumed through filtered traps. Seat fabric gets tape lifts. The underside of the dashboard is photographed. No ignition tampering, no steering column damage, no smashed glass consistent with theft. Each is recorded as confirmed negative evidence. The glove box is photographed in situ. If papers relate to recent appointments or insurance, they are bagged with separate item numbers for the records team to review later. Nothing is interpreted here beyond what can be measured. One detail gets attention because it is either nothing or everything. A thin segment of threaded pipe shows tool striations that spiral in a way consistent with a specific cutting method. If those striations match an end cap from the engine bay and later match a tool recovered in a separate search, the link becomes powerful. For now, the observation stays working, with a note to prioritize tool mark microscopy. Before sunset gives way to floodlights, the vehicle is finally prepared for controlled removal. Tie-down points avoid contact with evidence locations. 4 corner photographs fix orientation. The tow operator signs the chain of custody. The car travels to a secure facility where technicians can disassemble components under better lighting and fume control. The parking lot remains taped overnight to protect any stragglers in the grid. A short observation from the lead technician is entered into the log, not as a flourish, but as a caution. Patterns that look clean on day 1 can mislead if they aren't checked against lab numbers and any camera timestamps. The integrity of a case like this depends on not getting seduced by the simplicity of early theories. The next steps, chemistry, metallurgy, and any video authentication, will either confirm today's map or force a redraw. With hardware secured and tapes in hand, the investigation shifts to records and movement. What phones, rentals, and receipts say about who prepared for a bomb and who was close when it mattered. With fragments boxed and the Lincoln secured, the next stream is paper and dial tone. Investigators start with what 1996 offers: landline bills, cellular call detail records, fax headers, early email printouts, rental contracts, and travel receipts. No GPS, no app trails. The focus is on who contacted whom, when they did it, and whether those contacts align with the hours around November 1st, 1996. Subpoena returns arrive in batches. The call detail records are read like a map: origin number, destination, time of connection, duration. A series of short calls repeats across October. Brief hits clustered in late afternoons, then another small cluster in the days just prior to the blast. None of this proves content, it proves opportunity. The pattern matters more than any single call. When the same 2 numbers touch 3 times inside an hour and then stop for days, that silence is noted as a dark interval. It's not dramatic, but it is measurable. And in a homicide tied to timing, a quiet phone can speak loudly. Fax headers add the next layer. Cover sheets list dates and minute marks. A few are business routine: real estate documents, vendor follow-ups, kept to avoid tunnel vision. Others show after-hours transmissions between parties later tied to travel or cash. Analysts do not infer motive. They plot sequence. If one fax references an upcoming meeting and a call occurs within 3 minutes of that fax leaving a machine, the two are cross-referenced and parked for timeline building. Email in the late 90s is basic: provider logs, printouts, occasionally the body of a message if retained by a company server. Where available, headers show time zones and server hops that must be normalized to Tucson time. A run of messages references documents, arrangements, and timing, stripped of context by age but anchored by absolute stamps. None mention the club. None mention a device. Yet in cases like this, people rarely write the word they fear will be read. The value is in who is in contact, how often they exchange logistics, and whether those exchanges track with travel. Travel records carry weight because they're hard to rationalize after the fact. Rental agreements show who took custody of a vehicle and for how long. Mileage out and back is compared against routes to Tucson. Lodging receipts show check-in times that bracket calls on the same nights. One rental ties to an abandoned van later recovered out of state with a paper Tucson map and divorce-related paperwork inside. Physical items booked into evidence long after they were left behind. The map is not a confession. It is a coordinate set. The divorce file is not a motive by itself. It is a window into grievance and access. Each object is logged, photographed, and cross-indexed to the communication windows. What emerges is not a single arrow, but a lattice. Around the last week of October, calls tighten, then drop. Voicemail calls spike and cut off. A fax pings after regular business hours, then nothing for half a day. The morning of November 1st shows ordinary traffic. Early afternoon turns quiet, no outgoing calls from the victim's line for a critical stretch that ends with the blast. That absence is negative evidence that supports the scene findings. The attack was timed to vehicle access, not drawn out by a dispute on the lot. Investigators interview gate guards, valets, and club staff to anchor the communications to movements. A staffer remembers a sedan lingering near an entrance the week before. That memory is only useful if a camera tape can place a vehicle there, and if a rental log shows a car of that class active in the same window. Detectives send the cassette tapes from the club for duplication and time-based correction so their time codes can be aligned to the call detail clock. If the tape shows a vehicle arriving at 5:19 p.m. and a corresponding phone goes dark at 5:16 p.m., the 3-minute offset is examined, not celebrated. The discipline is the point. Claims must withstand the clock. There is a caution embedded in this kind of analysis. Clean patterns can seduce. Spikes in calls can mean nothing. Gaps can be coincidence. That is why every plotted point is forced to compete with something external: tolls, receipts, tapes, a signed rental contract. When two different record sets land on the same minute, you move that square closer to confirmed. When they don't, you hold the line. By the end of the first sweep of returns, detectives have a working digital timeline, a tightening of contacts in late October, isolated late-night faxes, travel aligned to Arizona corridors, and a quiet block leading into the late afternoon of November 1st. It is not proof of motive or authorship. It is the architecture of opportunity and access, era, correct, and testable. Paired with the physical work from the lot and morgue, it starts to close the space where speculation used to live. With clocks aligned and rentals in view, it's time to test human statements against these records, alibis, explanations, and the gaps between. With clocks and rentals charted, human statements are tested against hard records. Detectives begin with short, structured interviews. Time anchors first, opinions last. Everyone tied to Gary Triano's final week is asked the same baseline set: where they were during late afternoons in the last week of October, who they called, who called them, and whether any contact involved plans near La Paloma. Notes are immediate and concise. Each statement gets its own line on the master timeline to prevent drift. Nothing from this chapter retells the explosion, only what people said and how those words hold up. Close contacts describe Gary's schedule as busy but predictable. Client lunches, late afternoon check-ins, and occasional club visits. A business associate recalls a call about paperwork sometime after 5 the day before the blast. Call detail records confirm a 2-minute connection at that time from Gary's line, aligning with the associate's account. That item moves from preliminary to confirmed and becomes a clean anchor for the late October rhythm. Not motive, not theory, just time on the clock. Other conversations are less solid. One acquaintance claims Gary mentioned strange vehicles trailing him in the weeks prior. Investigators log the statement as preliminary and check it against any club gate notes or neighborhood calls for suspicious activity. No matching reports appear in the relevant window. Without independent support, the strange vehicles line remains preliminary and is parked, not erased, not elevated. A different interview provides the kind of detail that can be tested. A contact insists they phoned Gary the afternoon of November 1st and left a message about rescheduling. Carrier records show an incoming call to Gary's line earlier that day. The voicemail ping is visible, but there's no connection in the late afternoon block. The contact may be misremembering. That happens under stress. The claim is tagged inconsistent with carrier detail and noted for a follow-up. Detectives do not catch witnesses. They reconcile them. Investigators also speak with individuals whose communications appear throughout the October call clusters. Here, the approach is sharper. This number reached you 3 times on October 29th in the late afternoon. What was the purpose? If the interviewee describes business logistics and can produce a fax that matches the minute marks, the explanation gains traction. Where the person claims, "I didn't receive those calls," the paper wins. The contradiction is recorded as inconsistency and routed to the prosecutor's file. In court, jurors don't need narrative flourish. They need to see a witness's certainty next to a timestamp they can read. Alibi checks follow the same rule. Compare claimed location against a document that doesn't care about memory. A person states they were out of state the entire week before Halloween. Airline receipts show travel starting later. A hotel ledger places them back in Arizona earlier than claimed. None of this implies authorship of a bombing, but it narrows access windows and credibility. The entries are tagged working until the hotel produces a certified copy and the airline confirms an itinerary. Once received, each item moves to confirmed. The master timeline is updated and cross-referenced with the dark intervals from Chapter 4. One interview offers a useful negative. A club staffer, asked whether Gary argued with anyone that afternoon, says no, there was no scene, no confrontation. That observation is paired with the digital pattern, no spike in contemporaneous outgoing calls from Gary's phone, and strengthens the understanding that the attack was timed to vehicle access, not a public dispute. The staffer's statement remains working until independent checks of radio calls and any exterior tapes confirm the absence of a disturbance. When those checks align, the item promotes to confirmed negative evidence. A small number of interviewees introduced theories circulating in Tucson at the time: business enemies, vague mob ties, retaliatory motives. Detectives document each and run a standard filter. Does the claim produce receipts, sourcing for components, travel that overlaps the window, or communications that align with actual timestamps? If not, it stays preliminary rumor and is shelved. The point is not to dismiss possibilities, it is to refuse elevation without documentation. This discipline prevents a later courtroom fight over stories that never touched a ledger or a tape. When the focus turns to personal relationships, the questions remain factual. Who controlled which insurance documents? Who had recent access to Gary's schedules, vehicles, or routines? If a person asserts, "I had nothing to do with his insurance," investigators pull the policy file and communications around it. Where emails or faxes show planning language about coverage changes in the months prior, those artifacts weigh more than a recalled denial. The voiceover doesn't speculate. It states what can be shown and flags the rest for legal argument. Across multiple interviews, one pattern repeats. Several people place key phone calls earlier in the day on November 1st, then no further contact until news of the explosion spread. That matches Chapter 4's quiet block in late afternoon. The alignment is noted as working corroboration, not proof of involvement, but consistency about the silence before impact. It's a small but persuasive brick, different sources, same quiet period. A short human note belongs here, deliberately limited. In violent crimes, friends and family are put on a witness stand long before they reach a courtroom. A respectful interview acknowledges grief while insisting on precision. That balance, firm, fair, documented, isn't about optics, it's how truth survives later challenges. By the end of this round, detectives have promoted a handful of statements to confirmed because a clock or document supports them, parked others as preliminary until tapes and ledgers can weigh in, and marked several as inconsistent where memory clashed with records. The output is not a theory, it is a grid of what people said and what the paper allows. With statements graded and contradictions flagged, the next step is to trace procurement, who sourced parts, who moved money, and when those acts line up with the blast window. By the midpoint of the investigation, detectives knew the car bomb that killed Gary Triano was not improvised in haste. It was the product of planning, procurement, and calculated timing. Records pulled from Tucson businesses, banking trails, and out-of-state vendors began to outline how someone with resources could arrange a bomb without leaving obvious fingerprints. Investigators recovered fragments from the Lincoln's trunk, wiring remnants, battery casings, and metal shrapnel consistent with commercial explosives. Laboratory analysis confirmed that these were not random materials scavenged from a garage. They were shaped charges, consistent with supplies used in mining and construction. According to contemporaneous reports, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was contacted to cross-reference serial numbers and manufacturing lots. The fragments pointed toward purchases made through legitimate distribution channels. Detectives traced one line of procurement to receipts for explosive materials obtained under false pretenses. Vendors reported transactions in cash, often small enough to avoid mandatory federal reporting, but when stacked together, they created a trail of sourcing. Investigators flagged inconsistencies. Names on invoices did not correspond with local residents, and phone numbers listed on order slips were inactive or traced to prepaid accounts. Each discrepancy suggested deliberate obfuscation. Surveillance records from nearby hardware outlets added another layer. Clerks recalled individuals buying wiring, tape, and triggering devices weeks before November 1, 1996. These purchases, on their own, looked ordinary. In hindsight, detectives identified them as components integrated into the car bomb. According to court filings, investigators obtained store security logs, rudimentary by today's standards, often on VHS, but they captured timestamps and partial vehicle descriptions that placed suspects in proximity to key materials. Financial records also factored into the planning analysis. Around the time Triano was killed, investigators noted insurance policy activity tied to his former spouse. Although beneficiary changes and premium adjustments were not evidence of bomb construction, they demonstrated motive and financial anticipation. Cross-referencing policy data with purchase receipts created a pattern. The crime was not spontaneous. It was structured around financial payoff. The question of timing was critical. Triano was killed just after finishing a golf game at La Paloma Country Club, his movements predictable to anyone tracking his routine. Investigators reasoned that whoever planted the device had studied his schedule, knowing he would walk to his car in late afternoon with little variation. Evidence suggested surveillance, likely conducted days in advance, identified that narrow window when a bomb could be armed without detection. Court documents later noted that Triano's predictable presence in the Catalina foothills made the timing feasible. Interviews reinforced the planning element. Associates of Triano told investigators he had expressed concern about people watching him, though he never filed formal complaints. Such testimony, marked as preliminary at the time, added to the working theory that surveillance was active before the bombing. Detectives cross-checked this against phone activity in the area and noted negative intervals, blocks of time with no calls, possibly indicating suspects avoided traceable communication during surveillance. The broader picture formed by Chapter 6 evidence was clear. Procurement of commercial explosives, cash-based purchases of supporting materials, financial alignment with insurance benefits, and surveillance of Triano's routine. Each element reinforced the conclusion that the attack was not impulsive, but the product of careful orchestration. In towns like Tucson, deliberate crimes of this magnitude reverberate far beyond the victim's family. They challenge a community's sense of safety in everyday spaces, country clubs, parking lots, familiar streets. For viewers today, it is worth asking, how many quiet, calculated steps precede a single violent act, and how often do they go unnoticed until it is too late? Once investigators had tied financial records, taped conversations, and procurement receipts together, the focus shifted to building a charge that could stand in court. The car bombing of Gary Triano was never going to be prosecuted on speculation. It required a clean narrative backed by admissible evidence. According to court filings, the charging theory developed around Pamela Phillips, Triano's ex-wife. Financial analysts from the FBI tracked her payments to Ronald Young, labeled as consulting or loan repayments. The timing aligned with both the purchase of bomb components and the immediate aftermath of Triano's death. This created a working theory of a murder-for-hire scheme designed to secure insurance payouts. Because the device used was an improvised bomb, the ATF handled explosives analysis, confirming commercial origins. Tucson police managed local interviews while federal agents handled interstate elements. Cooperation avoided duplication and ensured each strand of evidence was admissible. When Young was later arrested in Florida, seized recordings captured guarded conversations with Phillips. Those tapes, combined with the money trail, gave prosecutors leverage. By 2008, Phillips had moved abroad. An arrest warrant was issued, and Interpol was engaged. Austrian courts reviewed the U.S. request, concluded that the conduct met dual criminality standards, and extradited her in 2010. That coordination highlighted how international agreements can decide whether a suspect faces justice at all. For prosecutors, the challenge was blending financial motive, explosives expertise, and testimony into a single chain. Each element alone could be contested. Together, they formed a structure for indictment: conspiracy, procurement of explosives, and intentional homicide. This was not about storytelling. It was about aligning every piece of admissible evidence with the statutory elements of first-degree murder. What began as a baffling car explosion in 1996 had, through years of interagency work, evolved into a chargeable conspiracy that could go before a jury. It showed how persistence, even across borders, can push a complex crime toward resolution. After extradition from Austria in 2010, Pamela Phillips faced hearings that set the tone. Bail denied as a flight risk and suppression motions rejected. The judge admitted bank records, insurance policies, and select recordings, each authenticated through chain of custody and custodial testimony. At trial in 2014, prosecutors built the case on continuity, financial transfers to Ronald Young, corroborated call records, and expert analysis of bomb fragments. Witnesses tied insurance benefits directly to Phillips, establishing motive. Defense argued ambiguity, business payments, vague conversations, and circumstantial lab results, but the jury weighed the integrated timeline and found deliberate orchestration. The verdict was guilty, with Phillips sentenced to natural life without parole. For Tucson, the outcome underscored how paper trails and recorded fragments can carry as much weight as physical evidence. Guilty. Pamela Phillips sentenced to natural life without parole in 2014. Looking back on this crime, what stays with me isn't just the cold facts of a bomb in a courtroom, but how choices built on greed and deception can destroy lives far beyond the immediate victim. Justice was served, but the lesson is larger. Every community depends on integrity and trust to stay whole. If you followed me through this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What lesson do you take away, and how do cases like this change the way you see people around you? Share your perspective in the comments. Whether you felt anger, sadness, or reflection, your voice matters. And if this video resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these conversations travel.